know there are a number of phrases that we all remember from, or continue to remember from the Iraq War, but one of them is, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. And that was Ambassador Bremer talking about Saddam. And we've got the gentleman here today who was led the battalion that was responsible for the hunt and capture of Saddam Hussein in Tikrit. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell, we're so honored to have him on this tour. Not only did he lead that battalion in its efforts, which included, he'll say, included a lot of different people, but he also received a Valor Award, which a Bronze Star with V, which is a very rare thing for a battalion commander or a lieutenant colonel to get. He was, I might lose the details, but I know they were ambushed, and he was part of that response. And he was actually put in for an award by his men underneath him, which says a lot about his leadership and his character. So he'll speak a little bit more, but Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell.
Appreciate y'all being here today. Is this on? Can you hear me now? Appreciate you coming and supporting the tour and supporting these great soldiers and Marines and really all of our men and women in uniform every day. I commanded the 1st Battalion, 22nd Infantry in Tikrit, Iraq. I served as a career soldier. I retired about 15 months ago. Fought in places like Kosovo, Afghanistan, and then also Iraq. Many people think the Saddam capture was an instant thing. It wasn't. It was 6 months of very hard work, working with the Delta Force team. They deserve much credit. 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, which was led by Colonel Jim Hickey, he was the one that actually led the raid, and my battalion was part of that. Long story short, on the Saddam captures, we just picked up the trail of a network of 5 controlling families that were around him like a mafia don, went after those men in those families and followed the crumbs pretty much all the way to where Saddam's location was. And he was captured on December 13th, 2003, and it was a great thrill to have been a part of that and to have led some wonderful soldiers. We faced a lot of things when we got to Tikrit. We were there in the first part of the war, although our division got in late because we were supposed to land in Turkey. That didn't happen. We had to reroute and come. And so we did get in at the tail end of April into some of the fighting. My battalion was able to go against elements of the Republican Guard that were still under arms and still fighting. And after that, things just began to die down a little bit, and we weren't sure how the Iraqis were going to respond to us. After a time, though, these Republican Guard, pro-Saddam, pro-regime Ba'athist people, which comprised about 100% of the town of Tikrit, because that was Saddam's hometown, we, in our area, began to take on some of the very first parts of the insurgency as it formed. And you may remember in that first summer of the war that Tikrit was in the news a lot for that reason as a part of the Sunni Triangle. The day that Uday and Qusay were killed, the people in Tikrit were not real thrilled about that. They were able to organize a little bit of activity that night, and I was coming back from a checkpoint that had been thrown up by my Charlie company, and the soldiers there had needed a translator to check out this car that we stopped, a couple of individuals, and they had a big sack of money in the back of the trunk. It didn't look right. It later checked out it was a legitimate business transaction. They were scared to death trying to get home with the money without being hijacked. And so after I departed that, I left and headed south with my small personal crew. We were in Humvees, and behind us there was loud explosions from rocket-propelled grenades where this checkpoint just got ambushed. I had just left it. And the first thing that came to my mind is I thought, okay, if they're ambushing, they're probably not north of where we were because it was open fields. They're probably on the same side of the city we are. And so I told my driver, I said, head south. I said, go a couple of streets down and take a left. We'll try to button hook and cut them off. And so my driver did that, as we went down one street, for some reason, my operations officer who was in the vehicle with me, he just said on a gut instinct, like we always operated on, he said, go one more street down. So we did. As we came then around the corner, button hooking back up north, we saw a white Nissan truck with black face-covered individuals. I saw the flash of an RPG in the back, and so I knew immediately what we had a hold of at that point. It was dark. There were no street lights in this back alley residential area. There were some like porch lights or ambient light that was out. And so I just shouted to my driver, I said, cut them off. And they did, well, my driver did, but instead of just cutting them off, he actually headed for the pickup and rammed it. So we rammed these guys, there were 4 of them, and it was just me and my driver. The rest of the element was still making the turns to try to find where we went. And that allowed me to get out on my feet. I flipped my rifle off a safe, and as I got out, I just began to fire into the cab at the driver. That was the first thing that entered my mind, was that we're going to make sure they don't have a chance to get away. And so I began shooting into the windshield as it, spiderweb circles and stuff, until I really couldn't make out the guy anymore. And then I shifted to the back. My men said, although I don't remember it, that the guys in the back were shooting at me, and I don't remember that. I remember it was very loud. But I shifted my fire, and I hit the guy, the first guy in the back. He had an AK. He was shooting it. And he went down, and then the third guy in the back, as I was shifting towards him, my driver, he managed to get out at this point, and he shot the guy that was in the cab, a huge Iraqi. I mean, he was, turned out later that one of the guys of the 4 was Qusay Hussein's brother-in-law, and he was a leader of a major insurgent cell that had decided to organize attacks all over the city that night. And so I shifted to the third guy and began to hit him, and then in a matter of seconds, the whole thing was over, and we had killed 4 individuals. And, they were heavily armed. We found rocket-propelled grenade launcher with several rounds, including one in the launcher that could have been shot at us. They had what we called a loop gun, M79, a U.S. grenade, 40 millimeter grenade launcher from Vietnam era. Every one of them had rifles, ammunitions, British grenades. They were heavily armed, ready for more mayhem that night. As quick as it happened, it was over. I began to hear gunfire in another part of the city. My sniper team and some of my scouts engaged an ambulance that was being used to haul insurgents. They got in a big fight. We had one other area that night where there was also contact. And, I still had the command. I was still in charge of 1,000 soldiers, even though now I was in a very face-to-face, even closer than you are to me, fight with these guys, and we just had to continue to move on. And we ended up taking out most of the activity at the terrorist cells that night. We killed 7, and I think there were 4 or 5 more that were wounded that we were able to get. I had 3 of my soldiers wounded in that particular action. All of it lasted a brief time. From that, though, we began to get the confidence of a lot of people in the city. When they saw that we would thin out this network of people, we eventually were able to get the cooperation of Iraqis, as we would get very key individuals. We captured the Ace of Diamonds, Abid Mahmoud, who was one of the 4 aces on the deck of cards. We captured number 52 on the deck of cards. We got Saddam's #1 personal bodyguard, Adnan Abid al-Muslim. Served Saddam for 20 years, very tough guy. My soldiers were able to capture him. About 60% of this inner circle network, my soldiers were responsible for thinning out. And then the 1st Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, the Delta Force team that we worked with, all of us combined. People often say that I was the guy that got Saddam. That's really not true. I had the privilege to command soldiers that were a part of the hunt leading to his capture. And we did get him on the final raid on December 13th. It was one of the proudest days of my life. It was not a chance thing, it wasn't an instant thing, it was months of hard work by a lot of great soldiers. And we were able, we just kept after it. We never quit, we never gave up. We didn't listen to polls at home. There was a poll in August 2003 that said 60% of Americans did not think Saddam could be found. They think that he had fled. 34% of Americans thought he might be killed, but he'd never be captured. 6% of Americans thought he might be captured and brought to justice. Thank God we did not listen to polls. We can't govern our combat actions by polls. We can't decide this war in the boardroom and the back room of politics. We have to have the support of the American people. This war, I believe, will be won on the home front, not the battlefront. Every man sitting up here today knows that we can win this over there. These guys are not 20 feet tall. We fought them personally, face to face, where you see their expressions. And they are not 20 feet tall. They can be beaten. Every one of us will tell you that. But we also know that if we lose public sentiment for this war at home, you will make our job difficult. It may embolden and encourage, aid and abet our enemies. And so what can you do? Take a stand. Do what you're doing here today. You took the time to come and listen to guys that have been there, and for that we thank you. Educate yourself, continue to do that. Challenge people at the coffee pot, the water cooler, in the workforce, whatever it is. Don't be mean or ugly, but challenge them. And say, we're going to stand by our men and women in uniform and their mission. We are not going to abandon our troops while they fight in the field. Thank you for being with us here today.